I needed a couple of extra days to digest what's occurred at Aston Villa over the last week before recording this show, because the result and the performance at St. James's Park was almost inconsequential and certainly heavily influenced by one of two season-ending knee injuries that occurred within 48 hours of each other. And isn't it funny how football is almost the perfect microcosm of life? Just when you're flying along and thinking that nothing can go wrong, boom, you get the rug yanked out from underneath you. And there's also been times, and I've been there, maybe you have too, where things seem kind of bleak and you're wondering, where do I get hope in this world? And then you get a phone call or a message or an email and everything turns for the better. Like with us and in life, Aston Villa will be judged, as we are, on how they react to the disappointment, because they have had the rug pulled out from beneath it over the last week. We'll talk about the game. We'll talk about the injuries. Believe it or not, I actually have a couple of legitimate silver linings that have come from this week as we review Newcastle 5, Aston Villa 1. And by the way, the start of a new season warrants a new show intro. That's the handiwork of producer Rob Young, and I have to admit I was absolutely deflated all weekend, most of Saturday and Sunday. I don't think I've been that down even after the first playoff final loss, and that comes down entirely to the injuries, which really overshadowed the game entirely. I'm so gutted for Buendia and Mings because they would have been so excited about this coming season with Europe, which they helped achieve, and of course their teammates who wanted to achieve it with them. So when Rob sent me the new intro, it was just the tonic on Sunday night because it reminded me of one of the greatest experiences of my life, visiting Birmingham finally, seeing the Villa live, made me think about the trips coming up this season, and honestly, it instantly snapped me out of my funk. So nice to see Samir Gaby's face again, sporting a classic Le Coq Sportif getup as he was among the traveling faithful that went to St. James's Park, camera in hand. Thanks for the photos and videos as always, Samir. Of course, a week ago, we looked at this as a huge opportunity to make a statement to start a new season. Little did we know what was going to occur, and during the game itself, it could have been a whole lot worse than 5-1, which in my opinion was impacted by the Mings injury. As I welcome you officially to the Holy Trinity Show, season number 3. Trinity, inspired by the Trinity Road stand, but also meaning three, the three key issues and moments that defined Newcastle 5, Aston Villa 1. Let's start, as we always do, with the key numbers, which changed dramatically at the hour mark. I looked at accurate long balls in this game, but the numbers were wide in some categories like XG and big chances created. But you know what? Our shot attempts were similar. The on-target conversion was not good enough. That's an issue to come up. And accurate long balls, we completed 19 of them for 61%, which for us is pretty high, actually. Here are some other key numbers that will get you in touch with 24/7 Services UK in Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool. And Paul watched Saturday's game with his crew, a couple of legends, Tony Morley and Jerry O'Halloran, at their favorite haunt, and they were equally mortified with what happened to Tyrone Mings. Paul also told me a great story about a job he recently quoted on. He gave the estimate, and then when it came time to doing the job, it took way more time and manpower than had originally been planned, which means that they lost money on the job because the quote was the same as the bill. Now, how many other people would have gone, well, sorry, it's going to cost this now because it took more time? Not Paul Handsaker, not 24/7 Services, because one of their core values is to create repeat customers. And that's how you do it. I've put those phone numbers, by the way, in the description of this video. Big-ish issue was Villa's formation and the tactical intricacies, especially in the early stages of this game, which truly set the tone. This was Villa's 11. Obviously, with Emi Buendia's absence, there was a decision to be made, and the technical staff decided that John McGinn would play wide left. And I will never question Unai Emery ever, but I would love to know the discussion and internal debate surrounding whether or not they should go to 4-2-3-1, because as things played out, Bruno Guimaraes sat deep, allowing Joe Linton and Tonali to press high and hard. And Douglas Luiz and Boubacar Kamara had a tough time coping with that, especially early. Now, had McGinn played more centrally, then maybe it would have been his and not Diaby's job to nullify Bruno. And I've said often on the show, I like McGinn more central, and I think he does too, because he impacts or affects the game more in that position. And just to give you an example of how badly overloaded we were in the middle of the park, well, Sandro Tonali had twice as many touches as John McGinn by half-time, and we need McGinn to be a central player. So I wonder if the discussion within the technical staff was more about the danger from the width, either Anthony Gordon on the left or Miguel Almiron on the right. And another debate that would have been discussed amongst them internally would have been who does fill in for Emi Buendia now that he's out. It would have either been Philogene Bidace or Bailey, and I just wonder how close the kid legitimately was to getting a start on opening day, and that issue is going to come up again later. Big, encouraging issue. We appear to have a baller in Moussa Diaby. And there are plenty of examples of players who have come from the Bundesliga or other continental leagues, and despite lighting it up there, they come to the Premier League and struggle. And I know this was only the first and proper Premier League impression, but the goal, the chance he created for Watkins, and then at 2-1 down, the really big chance on the give and go he created, where I was surprised actually he didn't go across goal. I think we had enough examples to see that he was dangerous, lively, switched on, alert, all those things we desperately need from a player who is our record signing. Big issue, the 2-1 goal, which ultimately ended up being the game-winning goal. Now, I found it odd and interesting that we didn't get to see the triangulated laser lines that VAR uses to make decisions on offside, because we used to on our broadcast feeds. And I know it was tight on the initial action, the initial ball played to the player who ultimately squared it up for Alexander Isak. Isak was in an offside position initially, but by the letter of the law was not interfering with the play, or at least with that action. And while we're on the subject, how on earth is Harvey Barnes not offside just prior to the 4-1 goal? Even my commentary crew said to the naked eye, he is clearly offside. Again, no VAR laser line triangulation, which smacks a little bit of lack of transparency. What irritated me about the 2-1 goal is that the routine seemed so obvious even before it was executed. I mean, mismatch Burn with whoever, play the diagonal to him, and then beat the high line that way. And I was frustrated by the fact that Matt Cash was tussled with, possibly blocked off prior to that sequence, and actually in doing so might have pushed him into a situation where he was keeping everybody onside. But after that moment, I'd be very curious to know what the individual responsibilities were, because Isak was so wide open. Was it man-to-man? Clearly not. Was it zonal? Don't know. Was it a hybrid model? I don't know either. But none of it worked. Big issue number 3, Ezri's error. And this could easily have been the number 1 issue because, as Unai Emery himself said, once it hit 3-1, the game was effectively over under the circumstances. And I don't know what Ezri Konsa was thinking at that very moment, but I could tell you for sure that his team was unsettled by Tyrone Mings' injury, and if there's one player impacted the most by that injury, it is Mings' defensive partner Konza. The two of them have developed almost a telepathic relationship over the years, especially down the stretch last year. So all of a sudden, Konza's partner is gone, and there's uncertainty, and that was a split second of uncertainty that was duly punished by a very fine player with a beautiful moment of instinct. After the 3-1 goal, Aston Villa was in that horrible footballing no man's land in a difficult environment against a very good team, trying to decide what to do, because a player and the team's instinct is to keep going, just try to get that next goal, stay in the game, chip away. Unai Emery said he was not happy with how his team performed at 3-1 down. And by the way, there was a brilliant chance to cut into that deficit when Watkins cut in and shot, and Matt Cash, wide open, skied it over a wide open goal. And it would have been very interesting to see how the mentality of the game would have changed at that point. But from where I sat, my feeling was Villa was listing heavily to one side. And when those two Villa thorns in Callum Wilson and Harvey Barnes came on with Dean and Cash on yellow cards, it felt inevitable to me that the Villa ship was about to capsize. Big issue number 2, 6th minute malaise. It only took 2 minutes for us to concede last year on opening day at Bournemouth after a very positive preseason. You would have thought, knowing the quality of the opponent, the fact that we have not won at that ground since 2005 and were battered there last year, and that we really wanted to put a solid shift in for our fallen teammate Emi Buendia, you would have thought that aim number 1 would have been to not concede inside the first 15 minutes and ideally for as long as possible. We conceded twice inside 16 minutes. And just like last year, it was a succession of errors that led to the first goal, which it so often does. And problem number 1 was that Douglas Luiz lost a duel with Sandro Tonali, who would end up going and scoring. Did he lose a duel or was he fouled? The referee was standing right there. This isn't the best video to look at. However, compare that moment with John McGinn getting called for a foul in virtually the same area of the field that led to the 2-1 goal. And that's what's frustrating for players and fans, is knowing the consistency and the standard and what a foul is, regardless. I have a fear sometimes that Aston Villa players are too easily going down looking for fouls, and they got to be careful from that, because this was problem number 1 on the goal. Now, in a perfect world, and Martinez would say this himself, he would either catch the ball from the shot or at least deflect it wider out of the danger areas. And that's a minor point, but I think one that could be made. Leon Bailey, however, simply does not do enough to close down that cross from Anthony Gordon or try to deflect it away in the first place. He simply waves his leg in the direction of Gordon. This would be considered lazy in the red-striped Jamaican Premier League. And this is where I just wonder, had Jadon Philogene-Bidace played in that role, do you think on opening day, what an opportunity for him, he would have busted his backside to close down Anthony Gordon harder there? I just wonder. And then Boubacar Kamara just watches as Sandro Tonali runs past him into the danger area of the box. Yes, Luka Dean was there, but that is Boubacar Kamara's run to track. And if he just simply matches that run, perhaps it would have been a different story. But he literally stands there and watches. So to summarize, this was the first game of the season at a ground you haven't won at since 2005 against a decent side who blasted you there 4-0 last year, and one you'd hope to be challenging with for a high-end position in the table. You're trying to play with all your might for a fallen teammate who is done through injury the Thursday beforehand. And that's the level of commitment, grafting, and desire that you show in the first 6 minutes? Is this team slightly overconfident potentially? Did they think that this season was going to be easy, that it would just carry over from last year into preseason? Because the alarm bells were ringing on the level of commitment on that goal, and it will have been a very difficult video debrief on Monday at Bodymore Heath, just on that goal alone. And the number one big issue that defined Newcastle 5, Aston Villa 1, missing Mings. I have never in my life experienced, heard about, or read about a club losing 2 core members of the squad within 48 hours of each other with the same injury. If you like to put a little bit of action on sports, a little flutter, a little wager, ask a bookie what the odds are of a team losing 2 core members within 48 hours of each other to the same season-ending injury. Here's a hint. The odds would be long. There are 2 aspects to this injury. One, how it impacted the match, and secondly, how it will impact Aston Villa for the remainder of the season. Let's start with the first one. And a lot of fans said, well, Isak was offside in the first place. If the assistant referee had just put his flag up, the whole thing could have been avoided. I'm sorry to tell you, but Isak was onside when that ball was played, even though I fully agree with the sentiment that delaying the flag is asking for trouble injury-wise, but that's a non-starter in this case. And if you don't believe that the players who are mere mortal humans like us aren't deeply affected when their vocal, defensive, and frankly alpha leader is stretchered off the field 48 hours after another teammate is ruled out for the season, you'd be wrong. They have every right to be even slightly mentally distracted by the circumstances. And it was 2-1 when Mings was stretchered off. I find it impossible to believe that we would have shipped another 3 goals and all those chances had he remained on the field fit. A lot of people reacted after the injury that, well, this is what we brought Torres in for, and we have Carlos now, and Torres was brought in to replace Mings. And I simply do not agree, and I've never agreed with that. Torres was brought in to complement Tyrone Mings by being a ball progression footballer. In fact, he didn't even make it into this 11 because I think Unai Emery was trying to ease him into the Premier League. Well, not anymore. And Torres is not a clearance king or an aerial duelist or a shot blocker. He's not a vocal leader either. He's trying to still master English. Maybe Diego Carlos could one day become a vocal leader, but not to the degree of Tyrone Mings. So that presence is going to be missed. And the reason why Mings was so effective down the stretch last year was because the manager simplified his job, and Mings did a magnificent job of basically relearning his position. Which brings us to the wider implications of this injury. And I'm sure you're aware of Aston Villa's Premier League record when Tyrone Mings is not in the lineup. We have but 1 win against Dean Smith's relegated Norwich and 11 losses in the others, in which we've conceded 23 goals. And I realize we didn't have Pau Torres or Diego Carlos to call upon then, but those 2 guys have really only just arrived to the Premier League, given that Carlos's injury was ghoulishly suffered early last season. Now, if you're an opponent that has a big front man, well, they'll be breathing a sigh of relief because they know they won't have to come up against him, and you're probably looking forward to corners and set piece routines because we don't have our clearance and aerial duels and blocks leader, which means it is going to be more important than ever that our wide players don't show the laziness that Bailey showed on the first goal, because we must commit further to closing those crosses down at the source so they don't arrive in the box in the first place. The scoreline, the result, the performance, all of it to me was totally inconsequential. There will be many clubs that go to St. James's Park and lose, good clubs, even by multiple goals. And by the way, this reception here, this is the reason why I have a very difficult time disliking Geordies and Newcastle United, a club that I've said often is very similar to ours. And one cannot discount the delicate dynamics of team, especially one that seemed to have carried its great momentum from the end of last year right through preseason. And now that has been rocked violently. And although Unai Emery put on a brave face afterwards, it was easy to tell that even he was flummoxed by what's happened to his squad since Thursday. And I'd be very doubtful that he's ever gone through a similar situation where he's lost two core members to season-ending injuries within 48 hours of one another at the start of a campaign. And this is on top of both Jacob Ramsey and Alex Moreno not being in the side, and they were key contributors to our run-in last season. So make that 4 members of last year's 7th place side that are not available, 2 of whom probably for the rest of the season. And our summer recruitment was, of course, designed to complement that group of players as we try to navigate the Premier League and Europe. So we've added 3 that we think are bona fide starters. Now we've lost 2 bona fide core members of the team. And depending on further recruitment, that's not going to make it very easy on us. So does this mean we are now facing an uncomfortable and stressful life ahead in the bottom half of the Premier League table? Not necessarily, but unfortunately, the reality is we are 2 season-ending injuries closer to that being an unfortunate possibility. Now, here are some legitimate silver linings. There are still 2 weeks left in the transfer window. That is plenty of time to at least explore a Tyrone Mings stopgap or some other bodies, and there will be sellers as September 1st draws nearer. Secondly, we have never been better structured to deal with something like this, even if other Premier League clubs won't be necessarily willing to help us out. Let's be thankful that we have Monchi and his team and the guidance of Unai Emery and our owners, rather than, say, Christian Purslow or Steven Gerrard, for example. And because this occurred early in the season, does this give us a little bit of adjustment leeway, even though the fixtures are going to come thick and fast very soon? What matters, as we learned last year, is how you finish. Here's another huge silver lining for Buendia and Mings themselves. They will be able to go through this process together, from surgery to rehab and recovery, all of it. They'll be able to support each other, push each other, and that is massive, because it's bad enough to be injured. To do it alone and have to be by yourself through all of that is terrible. I can only imagine how awful it must have been for Diego Carlos last year, only having just arrived, not really knowing everybody all that well just yet, and having to go through that. And now, this is not a silver lining, but opening weekend, Kevin De Bruyne out for months, same as Timber, the new signing at Arsenal. Other teams are going to go through this throughout the season. And again, that's not a positive. I wouldn't wish major injuries on everybody, but it is going to happen because that's the nature of football. It is weird, though, how many profile players have gone down after only one weekend. Now, here's where I'm going to try to throw a real wild card of hope in your direction, because ironically, I'm listening to Martin O'Neill's autobiography right now, thanks to my Canadian buddy Richard Davies at Midland Honda, and incredibly, he's talking about the period in his career where Forest, under Brian Clough, is just about to get rolling. And isn't it interesting? He said it in his own words. There was a key injury to the squad, which opened the door to somebody new, and it completely changed their fortunes. Unai Emery is clever, as Brian Clough was back then. Up until now, though, he's been looking at his squad like this because that's what's been presented to him. Now he's been forced to look at it like this. Is there a freakish outcome somehow where we actually end up in a better position because Unai Emery is now forced to consider different combinations, different approaches to the game that suddenly work. Now, we have agreed with Galatasaray for the signing of Nicolo Zaniolo, who spookily has done his ACL twice in his young career. He only just turned 24 last July. But this is a player with bags of potential and a high goal conversion rate. And most importantly, he is rated by Monchi, who signed him at Roma, and Unai Emery. That's what matters the most. But he could play all across the front three positions, another left footer, and most importantly, because we need it desperately, he's a big guy at 6'2". And frankly, I'm excited that we're going to have an Italian player in our squad again. Maybe he can be our modern era version of, and even an upgrade on, Benito Carboni. And we've been heavily linked to Sevilla's left back and Argentine national team member Acuna, who was magnificent in Argentina's World Cup campaign, can play left back, left midfielder, left wing, and apparently we're trying to move out Luka Dean and his massive salary because he's our top earner along with Boubacar Kamara. But this would be a really good signing because he's a tigerish 31-year-old. And apparently Unai Emery still wants to sign another attacking player. We've been linked with big ones, João Felix and Ferran Torres, and I'd be shocked if we weren't at least exploring another center back, maybe even Maguire or Laporte at Man City. Now, just bringing it all the way back around to football is life, life is football. 2 years ago, I lost my MLS commentary job via a Zoom call just 2 days before the season. I was shocked and obviously extremely concerned about what that was going to mean for my family. At the urging of my wife and producer Rob, I start this show, which you happen to support, to the point where I was able to visit Birmingham and Villa last spring. That's where I met Jerry O'Halloran and serendipitously Paul Handsaker of 24/7 Services, who became the show's sponsor. And now that's what I do. And I've never been more happy in my professional life. Now, that took 2 years. We don't want this to take 2 years. And this is not an optimal situation. But the point is, just when things seemed at its most bleak, doors and opportunity came. And as the old saying goes, it's always darkest before the dawn. I'm bringing it back for another season, some subcategories we can follow throughout the year to see how Villa is making out. And I've added a few categories, including penalty kicks for and against, but also the first half and second half plus minus. It's Watkins and Diaby will combine for the goals for, and at least that's a positive number. Everything else doesn't look the best, but it is game one of a 38-game campaign. Next up, Everton, and I'm not going to spend any time on this game because we just need to get to that fixture unscathed and try to overcome the psychological leadership shift and the changing dramatically of the team dynamic. Focus on the process and the game plan and hopefully absorb what we know will be a wonderful Villa Park atmosphere. However, given our current squad depth situation, I'm not sure if this is the gimme fixture that it has been in recent seasons. And for the players that are given opportunity in this game, they really need to show what they have, because this is another positive-ish outcome from this past week. 2 doors close, 2 doors open. Obviously, I would have loved to have spent this show talking about an opening week triumph. I would have taken a very good performance and a loss and a fully fit squad afterwards. Alas, it was not to be. And what happened in the 30th minute of this match deeply impacted the performance and the result. And what Aston Villa Football Club will be judged on now is how it responds to this opening week's adversity. And I feel, with Unai Emery as our leader, and yes, he'll be put to the test, but I believe with his experience, he will come through with flying colors. And I also believe that our club has never been better equipped from the owners on down to deal with the adversity that we've faced in this first week. Until next time, be well, and as always, up the mighty Villa.